Minister, we talked a little bit about making the justice system more efficient and easier for people to navigate, and so that those efficiencies can come to fruition. One of those important aspects is making sure that legal aid is accessible to those who actually need it. In your budget line item, support for legal aid on page 192 of the estimates holds legal aid funding flat from the previous year. What's the rationale for keeping it flat this year?
It doesn't actually hold it flat. It's gone up another 7.9 million. Now, admittedly, it went up in year as well. So if you look budget to budget, there's an increase. If you were looking forecast to budget, because we realized in year that we needed to supply a little bit more money. We've been trying to, I think, do a lot of work around legal aid to determine where their costs are. And in fact, we have, I think, some recommendations from the Auditor General with respect to that one as well. But yeah, that's the budget over budget. There has been an increase, and we will have to continue to monitor that situation just because there's a number of new initiatives that we're looking at, and B, demand in the program is often just based on who qualifies. So right. Since we've come into office, I think the increase has been almost 40%.
Right. In regards to who qualifies, what kind of education is being done to make sure that people that they're actually aware that they qualify for legal aid?
Well, I don't think, I mean, we do a number of attempts to get information out to the public, but I don't know that, I think usually the way in which people find that out, from my experience anyway, has been when they come for a first appearance and they speak to duty counsel. Duty counsel would usually let them know that they can make an application to legal aid, and then legal aid will make the determination. Okay,
so it's predominantly just duty counsel then? That is kind of the go-between, or?
That's my understanding. Sometimes a judge will tell someone that they should make applications. Sometimes a prosecutor will. Sometimes it just sort of depends on the individual. Right. The information is publicly available on the website, but of course people won't necessarily seek it of their own initiative. So a lot of times it is participants within the system that are advising an individual that they should make such an application.
Right. Now, in terms of rural and remote Alberta, what is being done to make sure that those folks understand that they have access to legal aid, and how many people actually use legal aid in those remote rural areas of Alberta, or rural Alberta in general? Do you have if there's challenges with that, what's being done to address that?
So I don't have all the information on that one, and the reason is that legal aid is a separate entity, and there's sort of a really good reason for that, given that sort of ostensibly the way the system is set up, I'm kind of the prosecuting agency, so it would be inappropriate for me to interfere too deeply into legal aid's business. We provide them with a grant, and we do have a lot of conversations around sort of the services we'd like to see and how we'd like them to operate. But in terms of like very specifics, in terms of where people are making applications and how many of those are being approved, we don't keep that information because it wouldn't be appropriate for us to have it.
Right. Now, just in terms of kind of the opioid crisis, which everybody's kind of surmised that that is leading to the additional issues with rural crime. How many folks that are arrested in these rural crime issues in terms of theft of property that are first-time offenders? It's more than just a criminal issue for them. It's a mental issue. It's an abuse issue. Again, to me, that seems to be that legal aid and maybe some other form of kind of justice would be more applicable there to make sure that these people are being dealt with more appropriately in terms of their mental health, addiction, that sort of thing, rather than go into the system.
I think you're absolutely right, and there's actually a lot more to that than legal aid. Actually, a lot of our police partners, I have to give them credit, are sort of very advanced in this progressive understanding of how the justice system ought to work. So in a lot of cases, the individual officers will themselves be referring out to services, but one of the things we're doing, especially in rural areas with respect to our RCMP contract, these integrated crime reduction units, what they do in addition to focusing on those prolific offenders who are sort of shall we say, frequently and intentionally victimizing members of the public. Some folks will be people who are committing crimes to feed an addiction, and those integrated crime reduction units, the point of that sort of more proactive policing is to allow those folks to be identified and potentially linked up with services. The Crown Prosecution Service also has a mental health diversion program, as well as an alternative measures program. So those sorts of diversions are a very cost-effective way to get folks into other areas of the system. But at the end of the day, in order to move them to those other areas, we have to be making those investments in things like mental health supports, in things like affordable housing, because housing is often sort of one of the underlying drivers on a number of factors.
So again, just to make sure, so I know that you don't want to interfere with legal aid, and I think that sounds appropriate. Just want to make sure that the grants that for legal aid is, I guess, again, appropriate for rural Alberta, or reaches parity with what's happening in urban centers, to make sure that legal aid is equally accessible to those in rural Alberta. Are you keeping stats on that and making sure that that's a measure in all fairness?
So what we do is we deliver the grant to legal aid. So it just goes as one grant. It's not for different areas. It goes as one grant, and then they provide the services. Again, it's on a qualification basis, so regardless of where the person lives, so whether they live rural or urban or wherever else they live, they're able to make that application. There is, I would imagine, sometimes difficulty retaining counsel in certain areas, but that's probably typical of professionals, so we sometimes have difficulty seeing doctors get into certain areas. But as I understand it, legal aid does, in general, a fairly good job of getting counsel on a file when somebody qualifies. Legal aid will work to ensure they're providing counsel regardless of where the individual is.
Right. So we've talked about some of the crime investigation units that recognize some people that are on addictions and that sort of thing. So when it comes to people that are actually imprisoned or in remand, how are you working with health to make sure that they are getting the appropriate mental health and addictions treatment that they need?
So I think we're working to ramp up some of those programs even now. So one of the interesting things, I'll speak to some personal experience. So if you've ever had the opportunity to attend the Edmonton Remand Center, they have Alberta Health Services right on site. And so that provides them with the opportunity to deal with the health and the mental health needs of the individuals directly. But certainly we're looking to expand some of those programs. It can be a little more challenging in remand because someone hasn't been sentenced yet. Once they're in a sentence facility, you can sort of mandate certain types of treatment, but in a remand facility, because the individual hasn't been sentenced yet, it's on a as requested basis. But we're starting to see more people come forward because they're spending longer in remand. More people come forward to look for those services. We're also looking to put in additional programs having to do with methadone and Suboxone. So opioid dependency treatments in place by prescription in Calgary and Edmonton.
Okay. So given that there's recent stories of alleged sexual misconduct at Alberta correctional facilities, what is your office and your staff doing to make sure that, and where in your budget would we be able to look at that you're taking steps to protect correctional staff in these facilities?
I think what you're referring to is an incident at a federal prison in Edmonton.
Oh, okay.
Obviously, they would be taking those
But
steps.
even that, it's highlighted in terms of the
absolutely. So
the
I think
provincial aspect of it.
Yeah, we've actually been working extremely closely with the Alberta Union of Provincial Employees, who represents those individuals, to work on a number of these issues, because they have had, for many years, some serious concerns about their health and safety in a number of ways. So we continue to work with them to ensure that they have access to what they need.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.